Last week, the U.S. Small Business Administration released a data set related to its PPP, or Paycheck Protection Loan Program, a program that is focused on saving jobs in this time of economic uncertainty. The data set includes information about every loan that's been given to date in a very compressed time frame. I think there's probably some really interesting stories in that data set. Stories like the business registered as a private household that received a $5 to $10 million PPP loan. We are going to cover that and more in this video. This is Restorative Capitalism. When you're done with this video, you are going to be left asking questions. Among them are going to be, what the heck did I just watch? But I encourage you to subscribe to this channel, like this video, because this is just the beginning. We are only starting to look at this data, and there's going to be a lot more that comes out, I'm telling you. I'm not the only one digging into Reuters, for example, surfacing that the Ayn Rand Institute has a loan of up to $1 million out of this program. That's interesting. Zero Hedge covered an article where thousands of investment advisors and portfolio managers received government bailouts through the PPP program. So where there is smoke, there is fire. Okay, digging right in to the PPP program. There's a link in the description down below that you can click on and follow along if you'd like. Information on how to apply, information on the details and forgiveness. So the things that you must do for this to not be a loan, meaning a forgiven loan. The thing I want to hone in here on the most though is these numbers. So the average loan, $100,000, total loans, 5 million, and approved dollars, $500 billion approved dollars that are out there. So to put that into context, pick your favorite billionaire that you like to pick on. Say there's this guy, Jeff Bezos, he lives in my town. And these are his balls. Jeff Bezos has a lot of money. But if you were to take all of Jeff Bezos' money and spend it, there'd be 4 Jeff Bezos' worth of net worth that would have been spent by this PPP program just in the last few months. That's a lot of money. Now, let's say your flavor of billionaire adversary is more like George Soros. We're talking about 20 times George Soros' total net worth that has been spent in this program in just months. So all the damage that either one of those could do by spending money has been multiplied by a giant factor by just what has happened in the last few months. So that, with that context being said, there is a link on here that if you go to the site, you can see where to download the data associated with this. I'm not going to step you through that download, but what I will do is show you, this is what it looks like after you download the data. You can see you get information for every single state. I'm going to go ahead and click Washington, that's my state. So you get a CSV file for every single small loan, meaning loan that is less than $150,000. There's also a document here that gives you information about the program. So looking at this, they value transparency, protecting funds, etc. That's great. That's why the Small Business Administration released data, and thank you, SBA. That's awesome. Now, it says PPP is a delegated loan making process, meaning SBA is not doing the loans directly, they're just guaranteeing them. Banks are giving the loans. So what that looks like to me is a little bit of CYA. If you don't know what that means, look it up. Forgiveness program, so yeah, right. So you have to comply with the criteria to have the loan forgiven. Got it. Loans that are canceled don't appear in the data. Great, so we have some data quality. And demographic data is voluntarily submitted. So we're gonna ignore the demographic data in the analysis that we do today. Let's move on to preparing the data. So once you get that entire data set here and you want to put it into something easy to manage, you got to take all those CSVs and stick them together. So the data set for large loans, ones that are more than 150,000, is a little bit different than the one for smaller loans. But what I did was get into PowerShell, and I entered some PowerShell in there, which takes all those CSVs, puts them into one file called merge.csv. Then you can stick it into your favorite analysis software. The software that I chose to use is literally the most revolutionary and awesome data analysis technology there is out there. It is called Azure Data Explorer. I'm not going to show you on the video, but I spent 10 minutes signing up for a free Azure account, uploading those CSV files, and making them available for analysis in Azure Data Explorer. We will consider our data at this point to be prepared. So time to go get familiar with what's in there. And to do that, I'm going to load up a thing called Custo Explorer, aka.ms/ke is where you can download it. And the first thing I'm going to note is if I look at my large data set and my small data set for large and small loans, what do they have in common in terms of data attributes? So if I do a little inner join across what's in there, we can see they all have information about zip code, city, state, this NAICS code, which I forgot to mention is another important data set for this that you can get from census.gov. I'll leave a link to. It basically takes these numbers and aligns them to business types. And we'll show some examples of that in a minute. Now, going to ignore the business type and race, gender, veteran, nonprofit, going to ignore all that. Jobs retained, that's one we'll look into. Data proved, we'll look into that. And then information about some of the lenders. What's in the large data set for large loans is not in the small one. In that case, we get address, loan range, and the actual name of the business. So great. So we have some great clues to go dig in on if we find something weird in the data. Now, the small loans, what's good about the data from them is that they actually include the loan amount. So you can see how much actually went for each individual loan, not just a range. Now, it's possible in Azure Data Explorer to take both of those data sets and do a union query like the one you see on the screen here, putting them in something we call loans. We're going to use that for a number of queries in this analysis today. So the first thing I want to do is take a look across the entire data set and see how many loans have there been and how many jobs have been retained. Okay, great. So see how fast that was to query that? Amazing. And this is like the cheapest Azure Data Explorer cluster you can get. We're looking at 5 million loans. We're looking at 51 million jobs retained. The first question I had when I saw that was how many jobs are actually in the United States? And so there's this site called departmentofnumbers.com. This says there were 137 million jobs in the United States. So we can do a quick little calculation here and say for the 51 million jobs saved and 137 million jobs in the United States, 37% of the jobs in the United States have been apparently saved by the PPP program, assuming no fraud and abuse that has been happening there. 37%, that is a huge number. So going back into the analysis, the next question I had is where are these loans taking place? Geographic locations are receiving these loans. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the same query that I just did to look at loan counts and numbers of jobs retained, and I'm just going to, at the end, join a couple of other data sets to be able to get the location of zip codes and then render that into a map. So let's go ahead and run that query, and we can pretty quickly get a feel for where those loans have taken place. So here's a map of the locations where those loans were distributed. See, looks like we got some like way out in Guam or something, Alaska. We got Puerto Rico and things going on down there. But when we look in the continental United States, the bulk of the money or loans went to California, Texas, Florida, and New York. What I want to do too is take a look at the same data set, just do a summarize count by state. And that way we can make sure that the numbers that we look at in the table correspond with what we just saw. Okay, so California, Florida, Texas, New York, that is exactly what we saw from the visual. Now, more interesting, let's look down at the bottom. So the state of AE, I don't know what that is. I didn't bother to look it up. The state of F1, probably supposed to be Florida, but it's F1. So there's some data quality issues here. Potentially that's what that is. I don't know. But the thing that stood out to me the most here is XX. What is XX? I looked around a little bit to see if I could find what does XX mean as a state code. And there might be something out there, but I didn't see anything. So I'm just going to take a look at each of the loans that was distributed to XX. So we'll go state is equal to XX and take a look at, there was only 210 of them. So let's look at all 210 real quick. And if we look at those 210 loans, we can see that some of them actually have some location information and jobs retained. So let's ignore those. Let's focus instead on just the blanks, just the loans that had no jobs retained. Some of them have NAICS codes, so there is at least theoretically some industry that they're associated with, but they have no location, no other information. It looks like a lot of them came from the Huntington National Bank. That's interesting. That is something we might need to follow up on. Huntington National Bank. And then Third, Fifth Bank, and Celtic Bank. That's a question we're going to come back to. What is XX? And we'll come back to it in another video, that is. The next question to ask is, when did these loans happen? So I'm going to take the same query, which joins the large and small loans together, summarize it by date approved and type. And then we're going to render that on a time chart. So do that, and we see a time chart. So what this shows is beginning of April is when this started, and then April 19th to the 27th, there was this giant gap. Why do we have that giant gap? Not sure. I think we can come back and answer that question later. But then there's this also giant spike on the 3rd here, May 3rd. And then I guess the other interesting thing to note is that there's a little bit of a weekly seasonality to this, meaning that more than likely there are some loans that are being approved on the weekend, but the bulk and majority of them are happening during the weekday. And that's likely because this is happening by banks, not government, so that's why there's still some happening on the weekend. Anyway, we'll come back to that gap and this spike another time. The next question I want to ask is, what kind of jobs are being saved by this loan program? And to do that, we're going to use this data from the census called the North American Industry Classification System. And what the NAICS data does is it takes this number for the NAICS code and provides you a title that describes the type of business. We're going to summarize by the count of loans and the number of jobs retained, and join that in with the NAICS data. Doing so, we'll see that there are 1,060 different NAICS codes that have information about them or have loans associated with them. And right up at the top, we can see full service restaurants and limited service restaurants as being the bulk of the jobs that have been saved. So that's interesting and expected. There's some things about physicians, religious organizations, hotels, new car dealers, lawyers, dentists, etc. I think that looking through all 1,060 is out of scope for the video, but looking at a few down at the bottom, commuter rail systems, NAICS, that's interesting. Executive and legislative branches combined. So any of the NAICS codes that start with a 9 have something to do with the government. So that's kind of interesting and something that we can come back to later. The government providing money for the government, conjuring money for the government. Goat farming. Oh man. Okay, so some goat farming jobs have been saved. Let's see, lots of interesting things coming out here. Deep sea passenger transportation. I didn't even know there was such a thing. I got to figure out more about that. But wait a minute. Breakfast, cereal, manufacturing, and police protection. Both of those industries have saved 666 jobs. That is ominous. Ominous. Okay, yeah, I could really just do this like almost all day, but I got to call it one more. Fur-bearing animal and rabbit production. Had I known that that was an option, I wouldn't be doing this, and I wouldn't be doing my full-time job. I could be producing fur-bearing animals. Huh. Okay, what I ended up doing was taking a look at all these 1,060, and I picked out the ones that I thought were interesting in some way, and I dropped them into this table that I called WTF. Security and commodity exchanges, really? Are those people out of work? And then residential property managers. I don't see a lot of people moving because of the economic uncertainty. I see people hunkering down and staying and paying their rent. So that one's a little weird to me too. That one we're going to definitely dig into. Videotape and disc rental, is that still a thing? Are there even businesses that do that? I guess so. And the other one that just really stands out to me here is this private households. So a bunch of money went to private households. Let's find out how much, or at least in terms of how many jobs were retained for private households by running the same query we did before, but I'm going to interjoin it with that same set of WTF that we just looked at. So that'll just narrow it down a little bit to the more interesting ones. And right, okay, so lots of jobs saved by elementary schools. So in property managers, so we'll hit the property manager one because that's right on the top, and I think private households definitely. We're gonna hit those too. I'll come back another time for all these other ones. Let's scroll down and start looking at property managers. Now, this is an important thing to note as we go through these. These are going to be names of actual businesses that get returned, and we don't have all the business context. We don't know what these loans are for. We're just asking questions. So don't go cancel any of these people or dox them or whatever. Just, yeah, like, don't be ridiculous about this. But let's just kind of unpack these things as we go. So what I'm going to do first is limit this to the large loans so we can kind of look at the bigger things and the more interesting things. And I will note that for property managers, there are 2 loans in the $5 to $10 million range that resulted in 0 jobs retained. So those are both pretty interesting. So there's Penrose Management Company and Groton Equity Associates. If I got that pronunciation wrong, sorry if you're from one of those. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at Penrose Management Company first. So this looks like a place that real estate development, property management, exceptional lifestyle communities. So this is a place that makes money from providing places for people to live. And I don't really understand how that is an industry that would be directly impacted by the current economic conditions. I do know some people in property management. I'm going to ask them. I'm going to see if they're willing to talk about it maybe on video. So we'll come back on that one. There's also this Groton Equities Associates one. I guess we can take a quick look there too and see what we can find, if anything interesting. This looks like a company that, okay, yeah, that's the same address. So fairfieldproperties.com is their website. And if we go out to that website, we can see what were these $5 to $10 million for? It looks like it was for luxury residential residences. Maybe people aren't going to luxury rental residences right now. I guess you could make a case for that. But I think I've got questions. I don't have answers. So those are some of my questions. All right, let's get back in the data. Okay, here we go. It is time for what I have been looking forward to, and that is to dig into the data about private households. To execute on this query, I'm just going to query against the set of large loans with the private household NAICS code, and as you can see, I get 94 records back from that. And let's take the same strategy to analyze these as we did with the others and start by looking just at the $5 to $10 million loan range. And that's interesting. It appears that we only have one loan that was provided in the $5 to $10 million loan range to private households, and that was to this Lafayette Youth Baseball Association in Lafayette, California. 0 jobs retained by this loan, so that's interesting. I think we need to unpack that one a little bit more. So one of the things I found, I did a little bit of searching on this, and I found that there's a number of things that are called the Lafayette Youth Baseball Association. There's one in Indiana. There's a little league in Lafayette, but it turns out there's this business that you can find information on GuideStar, and it has some information about this company. Like, we have a website which we can look at in a second here. Let's unpack this. So looking down here, we can see, look at that. Expenses, $790,000 of expenses annually. A revenue, just over $1 million in revenue. Okay, so they're doing good. They're making money. And wait, am I reading this correct? It looks like it says all programs are run by volunteers except for umpires, referees, swim coaches, and soccer, baseball field preparation. Does that stuff cost $10 million? Very confusing. Okay, let's take a look real quick at the website here. lmyasports.com. So loading that up. And it looks like, it's all goodness. I mean, it's for the kids. Let's have leagues and stuff for the kids. But digging into this, I'm going to look in the About Us. There's some information about the people. But I'm going to click on the sponsors, because I click on the sponsors and I don't see anything there. And it turns out you're a sponsor. I'm a sponsor. Why is the U.S. taxpayer not listed as a sponsor? Very confusing. Anyway, I have a lot of questions about this. But as a data analyst, that's what I do. I ask questions and then I seek answers in the data. So I'm going to stop for now with the private households, and we might come back on private households with another video. Moving on, I want to do a bonus here. I'm going to pick on civic organizations just for the heck of it. And there's a lot. 2,086 civic organizations received a loan of some sort from the PPP program. So if I look down at the $2 to $5 million range for some of those, some of these things make sense. YMCA, Blood and Goodwill Center, etc. Western Pennsylvania Conservancy. I don't know what that is, but that sounds cool. But Burning Man. We're paying $2 to $5 million for Burning Man. You and me, we're paying that, and we're saving 0 jobs by doing that. So that's just another question. Let's do a search for all of the large loans that have the word Democrat in them. And doing so, you will find the Ohio Democratic Party took a loan from $150,000 to $350,000. So yes, your money and my money is going to the Ohio Democratic Party. So that's awesome. How many jobs did they save? None. 0. So great. Okay. Let's do the same thing for Republican. Let's take a look at that. All right. What do we got here? Okay. This is not a one-sided thing. We've got the Black Republican Caucus of Florida, and we've got that's probably some company, and that's some company. We got the Women's National Republican Club in New York City. So we have women Republican and black Republican. Are they saving jobs? Yes. 11 jobs and 64 jobs. Okay, so that's interesting. Let's see if the libertarians are taking money. I mean, apart from the Ayn Rand thing. None. 0 results. So here is the data associated with that previous news article from Reuters. And yes, the Ayn Rand Institute, the Center for Advancement of Objectivism. I don't know if it's one of many of these things, but either way, $350,000 to $1 million loan range. How can you explain that? I don't understand it. 35 jobs, saved 35 jobs, because apparently none of that stuff can happen working from home. I don't know. Now there's a few more that stand out to me. This is restorative capitalism, so I did a search for capitalism. Nothing. All right, so there's nobody like with a name of capitalism. So restorative capitalism did not take a large loan or a small one. Okay, democracy. Show me what democracy looks like. So it looks like a bunch of things taking money with a very few number of jobs retained. But this is all interesting. There's a few of these that kind of stood out to me. The Center for Economic Democracy stands out. And I'm going to go take a look at this page real quick. The Center for Economic Democracy is definitely something that they help movements for economic democracy. If you scroll down to the bottom here, so the Center for Economic Democracy, the goal here is, let's highlight that, advanced visions and practice for a just and sustainable economy after capitalism, meaning after you lose your choice on where to work or where to spend your money. This place that we're giving a loan to is helping figure out what that looks like for you. So great, that's awesome. What about the Democracy Collaborative Foundation? Let's take a look at that webpage. democracycollaborative.org. This is a research and development lab for the democratic economy. And there's a bunch of things that are going on here to create just climate justice and community wealth. And if you dig into this, you'll find that the goal here is actually focused on an American community in which wealth is democratized, meaning your wealth or your money is not your choice anymore. My wealth, my choice. No, it's going to be the community choice if the Democracy Collaborative Foundation gets their way. And finally, I think I'll call up one more. There's a whole bunch of these, but I'm looking at the Center for Popular Democracy. You will find a website where one of the goals of this program appears to be to defund the police. So defund the police. So your money is going to organizations that are trying to defund the police. If you've been looking around lately and wondering like, what is all this going on around me? I'm trying to provide for my family. I am, working on protecting my community. What are all these protests about? Defunding the police. Where are these people getting their money from? I don't know. I've wondered that myself. PPP loan is interesting. So let's talk about a little bit of a summary of what we just covered. We learned that Azure Data Explorer is awesome, and it is the best tool there is for liberating value out of data quickly. We learned that assuming that there's no fraud and abuse in the PPP program, that 37% of jobs in the United States were saved by the PPP. We saw some seriously weird stuff in here, like states with XX and F1. So things that just don't line up that might be data quality issues. Interesting things about when the loans were granted and some of those gaps in time and spikes that deserve some further analysis. A few kind of individual loans that we looked at that were interesting. The Lafayette Baseball League, $5 to $10 million. Some property managers. And we learned that political parties, Democrats and Republicans, are taking this money and using that. Potentially within the constructs of the loan program. Point being overall that money coming from the government is not an efficient distribution of capital. Regardless of your politics, do you want to live in a world where the government allocates money based on politics or not? Finally, we learned that there's a handful of organizations that are focused on ending your individual freedom that are getting money from the government in the case of this PPP loan. So they want to transform society. So I think we'll do a little bit more digging in on that, and we might find some more connections. And that is the conclusion of the video today. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit subscribe. Don't forget to hit like. Check out the channel trailer for Restorative Capitalism. It has a quick 1-minute summary of what we're all about. Thank you and have a great day.